Hello?
Recording in progress.
I think. Hello? Hello?
Miss Ololade, if you can hear me,
I
we
can hear
can
you.
hear you. We can
Can you
hear
hear
you.
me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Journalism and Society conversation by the Wally Shoyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. We would like to welcome you on behalf of the Wally Shoyinka Center for Investigative Journalism to this special edition of the conversation. While we're welcoming you, would also like to give about 5 minutes to allow others join in on the conversation. Welcome everyone who's joining. I see that we have the three participants already on the call. We'll give time to see if we can get up to 50 people joining in the room. Welcome to everyone, industry experts, civil society, captains, students, experts from different backgrounds, civil rights defenders, press freedom defenders. Welcome to the call. And we'll be starting the call shortly, the conversations, I beg your pardon, shortly in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Please also do well to tweet or share the link to join this conversation to members of your network. This is an important conversation around AI and press freedom. Tweet about it. Do well to tag the WSCIJ on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and various platforms. Share the link for people to join. And we're getting up to 40 already, so I'm sure that in less than 5 minutes, we have 50 people on the call already. Please do well to continue to share, tag, and keep the conversation ongoing. Thank you. Welcome. If you're just joining us, this is the Journalism Society conversation by the Wally Shoyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. Welcome to this very special edition, which is in commemoration of the World Press Freedom Day. And we'll be discussing AI and press freedom. While we're waiting for others to join, please do well to tweet about this conversation, share them on your social media platforms, share the links for other people to join. And we're waiting till we get up to 50 and we're 7 persons away from 50 to kick off the conversation. So give and take, we'll be starting the conversation in the next 2 minutes. So do well to ramp up the numbers, share the link to this conversation. It's open for all to join. Welcome once again to everyone. Thank you for the early comers, if I may use that expression, and we're waiting for more people to join. We're 6 people away from 50, and the conversation will be starting very soon in the next 2 minutes. Do not forget to continue to share the link to this conversation. We're 5 people away from 50, and the conversation will kickstart in earnest in the next 1 minute by my time. If we could get the virtual DJ to turn down the music. Thank you very much. Once again, good morning and welcome to the World Press Freedom Day conversation brought to you by the Wally Show Center for Investigative Journalism. Thank you everyone for joining. We were looking forward to start with 50 people, but we have 52 people on the call already. Welcome to everyone. This conversation is very important and very timely. It's a special conversation, like I said earlier, which is meant to commemorate the World Press Freedom Day. And today's conversation would try to answer or provide solutions to the conversations around AI, artificial intelligence, and press freedom. Like we all know, the press, or we may not agree, but I think that the press is the lifeblood of every democracy. And without the press, no democracy functions. However, the conversation we're having today would try to tackle or interrogate rising technologies, evolving technologies such as artificial intelligence and how it affects press freedom, or how press freedom would thrive in an age of artificial intelligence. This conversation is brought to us by the Wally Shoyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, and we have brought together experts who will be answering, providing solutions, will be tickling our brains around this conversation. Please do well to share the link to this conversation, invite more people to the conversation so we can have a very robust conversation. I'd like to thank the various participants, attendees, and contributors from industry experts, from civil society, captains, press freedom defenders, students, journalism, and everyone who is working in their various spaces to make sure that press freedom does not become a thing of the past. We thank you for being part of this conversation. And I'd like to inform us that contributors or experts who will be leading these conversations are already on the call and waiting to fill us up with what they have to offer. My name is Chiamaka Okafor. I am a journalist and also the Executive Director for the Media and Information Literacy and Intercultural Dialogue Foundation. And we have two great persons who will be filling us up in on this conversation. But before we go straight to our experts, I'd like to welcome Ms. Motorai Alaka to do the welcome and opening remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
Press Freedom Day, which was on a good day to mark. It's an important day. Press freedom is fundamental to existence in the world. But first, let me appreciate the moderator for taking up this role. Ms. Chiamaka being here. Thank you to Lua Olumajani. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to Mr. Olatunji Ololade, who is the of the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate and I'm particularly excited about the panel and the value that would have. Just like to press freedom is fundamental, like I said earlier, to democracy, to social justice, to good governance. Freedom is not a given. And even in countries where the people are elected into power, and ideally democracy should be what is in operation, we find we have to consistently, defend the terrain that we work in. We have to consistently fight sometimes to be free and to ensure that what we have is actually freedom. A story that I would like to quickly tell that underscores what is happening ahead. I think about 50 years ago, I was at information, and one of the major speaking to the situation from press freedom in Nigeria, and it was saying that, well, what you have is a situation where you are promised a buffet, but at the end of the day, you are actually a la carte. So the promise a widespread, great things happen, the laws are there. This, generally speaking, I do have laws that are also against press freedom. But generally speaking, but in practice, where editors can be picked randomly, journalists can be picked random, media organizations can be overnight. Then, what we are getting, it's a function of what we ordered versus what we are eventually getting. And that is why, a conversation like this is important. But, we're also underscoring to dating on emerging technologies, and particularly artificial intelligence and machine learning, and how they are at scale shaping the landscape of what we call truth, what we call power, what individuality, the access to the what we call news. And whilst we know that credible promise from AI to journalism, we know that there is promise of investigation, helping go through automating very tedious tasks, analyzing parts, just help operation side of our work. But we also know that we are now facing unprecedented threats, and especially threats are not new, but it is now the scale of algorithms or the pressure to use media organization, disinformation at scale, and all of that. And so we really want to see how we can remain independent, or if it is possible at all, remain independent and ethical and inclusive and truly free in this situation. In our work at the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, especially under a program we call Civic Space Guard, which is positioning investigative journalists as guards of the civic space, and our program where we work with subnational level organization and journalists, the Collaborative Media Engagement for Development, Inclusivity and Accountability, which we call CMedia. We're finding that the threats to press freedom are real, and they are even more so at the local level. Governors are getting away with murder, for instance, because it is indeed quite unsafe to report at the local and at the safe level as a journalist. But what dynamics does even artificial intelligence throw into this? So without preempting our great speakers and our great moderator, I'll just ask that, we analyze this thing, but beyond this room, that we engage with the issues. For me, from where I stand, it seems scary, especially the scale and the funds, the resources that are in that business that we have to contend with. But there is always a way out, and the bright minds in the house, I'm sure, will help us. So again, welcome, and let's have a great celebration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alaka, for that very short and concise welcome address. Just like she asked, what dynamics does artificial intelligence bring to the melange of issues faced by the press in today's world? If you're just joining us, this is the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, AI and Press Freedom Conversation to commemorate World Press Freedom Day, which was 2 days ago. But we're here having these conversations, and we have two experts in the house which will help us answer the question, can press be free in an AI-driven world? What does the press look like, or what would the press look like in an AI-driven world? We have two people on the call today to have this conversation with us, and I'd like to read a brief bio about both of them before we delve into the conversation. We're joined by Mr. Olatunji Ololade, who is a multiple award-winning journalist and media manager with over 2 decades of experience. From the front lines, he has reported conflict and emergencies across Nigeria, Cameroon, Liberia, and Cote d'Ivoire. His investigative work has shed light on critical issues such as war, policy failures, human trafficking, environmental pollution, and violence against vulnerable groups, including children, women, men, and the elderly. Mr. Ololade has a PhD in mass communication. He's also an alumnus of Thomson Reuters Foundation and the United States IVL Olumayowa Tijani. He's a development public speaker, social change. He holds a master's in media practice for development and social change from the University of Sussex, where he graduated with a distinction as a Chevening Scholar. He has worked on disinformation policy and research with the Agence France Presse, AFP, X, formerly Twitter, and the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD. His journalism has been quoted by international outlets such as BBC, Bloomberg, and the New York Times and CBC, and also translated into French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic languages. These are the 2 people we have on the call. And if your virtual hands are not too busy, please can we clap and welcome our 2 panelists who will be leading this conversation this morning. I don't see any virtual hands. Okay, I see 1. And there are about 6, 7 of us on this call. Thank you very much for clapping to ginger, to use Nigerian parlance, to ginger our panelists to kickstart this conversation. But before I welcome them to start the conversation, I'd like to invite all of us to once again share the links to this conversation, tweet about it, do well to tag WSCIJ on Twitter, on LinkedIn as part of this conversation. Share your thoughts. The chat box is open for introductions. Please do well to let us know where you're joining the call from. And the Q&A box is also there for questions. As the conversation goes on, please do well to type in your question. Due to time restraints, we may not be able to take all of the questions. So that's why we're all invited to use a Q&A column on the call to ask our questions, and I'm sure that our panelists will do well to answer as many questions as they can. I'd like to invite Mr. Olumayowa Tijani to give us opening thoughts on what he thinks about press freedom in an AI era. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for, I'd like to first thank the Wole Soyinka Center for inviting me to join this really important conversation. I would also like to thank the audience for joining us today and engaging in this very interesting conversation we're about to have. To preface my intervention in this conversation, I'd like to say that in 2020, at the start of the pandemic, I was invited to speak on what the pandemic would mean for the world. And of course, in my very, I know it all fashion, I went on TV and started saying this would happen and that would happen and that would happen. Fortunately, some of the things I said would happen did happen. A lot more did not happen. And that's just basically to say that I was speaking about an era that almost all of us in the world basically were left guessing as to what would happen or what might not happen. And of course, we saw some things change radically as a result of that. So like right now we're at that kind of junction again. We're having that kind of conversation again about what AI means for the future of the press, what AI means for press freedom generally. And I feel like in places where we don't have a very clear picture of what the future would look like, the past offers us some insight. The past gives us a little bit of information on what might happen. And the past this time around, I'll be referring to the printing press. Now, the printing press was invented by a German inventor many centuries ago. And when he invented it, the world had never seen anything like that. Before then, it was difficult for people to come across written text. the very few people who came across written text were the elites of that day. And but 46 to 50 years after the printing press was created, it was recorded that the world printed more text in 5 decades than it had done in over 50 centuries before then. So one technology comes on board and it changes the entire understanding of how the world works. So I feel like that's the point where we are again with artificial intelligence. My based on my study, my research, I've been studying artificial intelligence for the better part of the last 2 years. One of the things I can say for sure is that by 2030, we would have more AI generated content on the internet than human generated content. And what that also means is that this is going to basically affect how much human journalist work exists on the internet versus AI journalist work exists on the internet. As of February 2025, it was already recorded that there were over 1,250 AI generated news websites across the world. Now, if that is happening, it means we are now in competition with machines when it comes to reporting. We are now in competition with machines when it comes to distributing. A tweet I made this morning, I made it clear there that the people who would see this tweet would be dependent on what the algorithm says. Even though I have, say, 15, 16,000 followers, the fraction of my followers that would see that tweet would be the fraction of my followers that are interested in what has to do with media or technology or this kind of word freedom conversation. And so this algorithm differences that's sort of already ingrained into our systems now is already threatening how much freedom the press has, how much control the press has over what we do, who sees what we do, what kind of engagement he gets, and all of that. So it's important, and of course, that's why this conversation is very important, and that's why I'm grateful that I'm here to have this conversation with you and share my insights and take on challenging existential questions for what it means to run the media in a century like this. Thank you.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Mr. Loladi. Thank you very much, Mr. Tijani, for those opening thoughts.
Okay. My appreciation goes to the Wale Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism for setting up this forum. Like Mayowa said, it's very crucial at the moment. The question of whether the press can stay free in an AI-driven world zeroes in on professionalism and ethics. Today, we witness a threat to editorial integrity and freedom as more journalists are ceding ethical agency to AI. For Nigerian journalism, the challenge is existential. We are faced with the question of how to preserve the integrity, context, and independence of the press in an era where machines shape visibility and trust. Here, I would say the most important consideration is the human factor. We have to deal with the nature of the human element driving contemporary journalism practice. Now we are faced with I would call it an affliction of the prompt-driven journalist. To so many journalists now, AI furnishes an escapist model of practice. It provides immediate escape from the grind of hopping in the trenches to dig for truth. You can't sit in Lagos and report terrorism happening in Madagali or Konduga in Borno, for instance. What AI would always avail you is simply a superficial treatment and perspective to issues. To get to the roots of the matter, you would have to travel down to take that journey to Borno, to the scene of the conflict. And that is what AI denies you. A complete recourse to AI renders journalism, therefore, vulnerable to manipulation by vested interests, which could be human, institutional actors, towards which journalism ought to play the role of watchdog in the first place. I would say it's about time we have a conversation revolving around our need to see AI as a mere tool, a tool to aid journalism practice. It shouldn't form the core of how we define our practice, because a complete dependence on AI would always elicit distrust from the intended audience of media affair. Journalism spontaneously fixates on the downslope of things. This is one of the issues we are facing here. And when you focus on the downslope, we are focusing on that point in the arc of a story when consequences manifest. But really, it should focus on the upslope when triggers and the telltale signals of a problem starts manifesting. Now, this upslope is rarely the focus of journalism due to its lack of sensationalist appeal. Oftentimes, it's not amenable to clickbait reportage. Ultimately, because it's supposed to reveal systemic fissures, for one, it takes a truly free press, one that is ethically grounded and financially independent, to commit both human and material resources to the upslopes of news reporting and analysis. And this is what AI, complete fixation on AI works against. So I would say it's about time we have more of this kind of conversations to devise how the newsroom can work around the inconsistencies and ethical scruples incited by complete dependence on AI. So I guess as the conversation goes on, we'll discuss how this can be done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ololade, for that very thought-provoking opening. And I'm going to take you up very quickly on the prompt journalism you talked about and how AI has made a lot of us sit back and are lazy. You talked about how we covered stories from the comfort of our rooms and not having to go to those locations. And my question is, do we need to have to be at the location or scenes of events to cover them? And I'm asking this question, taking us back to 2020, just like Maiwa pointed, in the days of COVID where people couldn't travel, but we covered stories from all over the world. So how do we marry these two realities that we've come from and now we're here, and there's an argument that we have to be at the scene of the crime, if I may use that expression, to do proper reporting? And so I want you to also put into context accountability and transparency while doing such reporting.
Okay, I would, in response to that, I would insist that, during the COVID crisis, journalists still went out to do stories. There were certain professionals who were allowed a bit of wiggle room to go about their work. The health professionals, farmers on certain days, law enforcement agencies, and journalists. To a considerable extent, journalists were allowed that wiggle room to move around. It was during COVID that I was doing a story on sex trafficking that took me to Côte d'Ivoire. And that was where the COVID crisis met me. So I would say we were still able to move around, but responding to the fact that to that issue that raised about in an extreme circumstance whereby you find it difficult to move around and you have to sit. The only thing AI can accord you is a superficial treatment, perspective to issues. As a journalist, you still need to get in the field. That is why journalism is called a calling. Come what may, no matter the obstructions or the odds against you, you'll still find a way to circumvent these odds and get your story done. And that is what distinguishes between a prompt-driven journalist and a passion-driven journalist. In a situation whereby we don't even have COVID, I met Mayowa once on the field in Borno. He could have also stayed back in Lagos and report conflict from his desktop, from internet reports. But he had to go to the scene of the crisis, and some very few other journalists who have always shouldered that gauntlet to go to where the scene of the crisis manifests. It's always different. It resonates differently when you report from the perspective, from the trenches. It furnishes your reportage with a humane approach, a humane perspective to the issues manifesting. You have the respondent-driven narrative, which would always be very, very different from what you get when you sit at your desktop and just monitor reports on the internet. What you do then is you play the role of a curator, and what you curate could actually be an inconsistent and inaccurate version of events. So I would always say, in the spirit of accuracy, transparency, you would always need to get in the trenches, go in the field, and you get your story done. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
So if I hear you clearly, your argument is for the marriage of both. While AI will be good to give us prompts, it's also important to get to the field to get the work done. And I'll move further to say, or to ask the question about safety while reporting, and also the place of sources, if we always would have to travel. So the idea, a lot of people have argued that AI is supposed to make the work of the journalist smarter or even easier. So what is the place of the source? A journalist is only as good as their sources. So what is the place of the source in this conversation, and also vis-a-vis safety, especially when you're reporting from a conflict zone? What is the place of your sources in that area, and also safety and AI as well?
Okay. I will still insist that this will always distinguish the prompt-driven journalist from the passion-driven journalist. That is why you always find out that a few names would always stand out in the generation of journalists. That's why you would always have the likes of Mr. Dakwalon Yomi, Fisayo Shoyombo, Mayowa Tijani, Deji Ademuji, and co. You would always have them. There would always be those very few individuals whose work would establish them more appreciably than others. You can't, there is no argument for, we can't say because if you can't start the heat of the kitchen, don't venture into it. Journalism, like I said, it's a calling, and it's not something that you would always seek the easy way out in your approach to stories. True. In professions like in fields like neurosurgery and surgery, you find out that they make use of robots to assist them in doing some very delicate surgery. So doing journalism, we can see AI as a tool. We should always see AI as a tool, something to assist us in doing better work, to enrich our practice. We can't depend solely on AI, because AI, as you see, I was coming to the point that we should find a way to generate or establish an African Afro-forensic approach to vetting stories and validating facts and details furnished by AI. I have gone through scripts whereby I see the influences of AI. Some journalists today write the entire story with AI using ChatGPT and some other apps. And it's mind-boggling that you do that kind of work and you don't feel any sort of scruples. You don't feel worried about the likely outcome or how it could pass off your work. It will make you seem unprofessional, and it really erodes the quality of journalistic practice when we have to hide behind arguments of the hazards of covering conflict and so on. That is why we have to focus more on training our journalists.
Mr.
On the
Oladi,
good
I'll have to cut in there to say that I'll come back to you on the conversation about ethics and professionalism, which is where you're going into. But let me move over to Mayowa to ask the question about, you talked about, Mr. Oladi has spoken about Afrocentric forensics, something that helps us do forensics and confirm this. And earlier in your submission, you talked about how AI comes with a lot of uncertainty and also the control of content. So algorithmic bias and also the bias that comes with the people who have created this AI and how it is not exactly representative of every nook and corner of the world. So can you speak to how that is a threat to press freedom and what we're seeing today?
Thank you. I would say that one reality that we probably don't fully get within the context of journalism is that we're now in a world where, despite our efforts, despite our hard work, it is some algorithm in San Francisco that decides who sees our stories. So, for example, Dr. Olade goes to 3 countries in West Africa, does a very fantastic investigative reporting and publishes it. Now, that kind of story, there are certain people who would naturally be of interest, people who love his work, people who see the excellence in what he does, and would gravitate towards that kind of story. Now, when it comes to algorithms, in the past, you post something. When you make a post, once you share a story, the 15, 20,000 people who follow you, or the 5 million people who follow your newspaper, would see that story, would read it, would engage. It would lead to desired change. Now we are getting into a territory where some organization in the United States decides that, oh, this story is sensitive and this person does not like sensitive stories, so we are not going to show them. This person does not like stories that has to do with conflict. We are not going to show them. And that, of course, begins to undermine the reach that we have built over the years. Now, for most of great investigations, the investigation still has the impact. We still deliver on the change that we want within society, still reaches government and policymakers. But when we step it a little bit backward, when we step it to, say, news stories, where there are no deep investigations, algorithms start to decide, oh, what are the trending topics? What questions are people asking Google? What stories in the media answer those questions? And we have now gotten to a situation, and I know that this is probably early days in Nigeria, but globally, one of the things that is happening now is that we have people who have AI systems already built that listen to social media, listen to Google Trends, listen to what have you. And as a result of that, the AI systems produce stories that answer those questions. So I give an example. Personally, I believe there's an information welfare within the West and some other non-Western powers. And what happens in this situation is that these non-Western powers listen to what the algorithm is saying. So for example, this morning, if I go on Google Trends and I say, what questions are Nigerians asking? It gives me what the questions they're asking. And there is an AI system that is built to create stories in that direction. And when it does that, two things happen. Number one is that when people come to Google to ask those questions, again, those stories are thrown up as answers. Now, when those stories are thrown up as answers, it sets two parts. The first part is that there's a lot of people going as traffic to that certain website, AI generated or otherwise, to read that story. Now, is counting as traffic, as numbers for that website, is also counting as revenue because many of these websites will get Google adverts and whatnot as revenue for them. And what that does is that it then starts to, not in the immediate, but in the long run, it starts to threaten people who are actually doing the hard work. So, for example, I give you one of the AI generated websites that I have studied. I find that they have the capacity to publish as much as 10,000 stories in a day. There's no way any media house in Nigeria, good or bad, can publish 10,000 stories in a day. And so there's a big threat here that AI is using algorithmic bias, questions that real human beings are asking the internet to generate the other side. And as I was saying about the non-Western power I was talking about, one of the things that also happens in this situation is that they use the opportunity to feed propaganda into the system on the basis of people are asking this question. So if, for example, people are asking that, why does Tinubu go to France every once in 2 years or every year or something like that? And because they see that there is traffic that is being generated to that kind of questions, they then create an answer, a story, an AI-generated story that answers that question. Then infusing in that story some propaganda to say, okay, it's also because of this. Or in addition to what we have said, there's also this. So when those decisions are being made, when those stories are being published, it also feeds into an ecosystem of a certain people that are asking certain questions. Before we know what's happening, we think we are consuming trial news. We think we are consuming true stories. But we are consuming the product of AI systems. We are consuming the product of algorithmic biases. So I think that this is one of the things that we need when it comes to media literacy, helping people understand that when you are asking these questions, you should also be careful with the answers that are being thrown at you.
Yes, thank you. You just moved us to the next line of question for you on media and information literacy. And I always say that these technologies, AI, or whatever name they are being given that are used to perpetuate the negativities we're talking about now can also be used to drive positive change. So my next question to you will be, how do we leverage these technologies for good as well? How do we use them to promote good journalism, to promote professionalism, ethics, and all of the positive things we do talk about for good journalism?
Yeah. So this is one area where I very strongly have been advocating this within these spaces people I speak with and journalists I engage with. I personally believe, and of course, maybe controversial, maybe not, that there are certain stories that journalists should not waste their time on. So personally, I give an example, and I'm sorry to the business journalists in the house. NBS releases inflation reports to say, oh, inflation rates this month is up to 25%, blah, 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 and gives all the details. Personally, I feel like no good, quote unquote, journalist would waste their time on that kind of reports. I believe, and of course, that's my belief. I believe that that's the kind of story that AI should write. I believe that's the kind of story that you give the data to an AI system, a ChatGPT, a Gemini, whatever, to say, write the story, make it 400 words or whatever the house style to use is. And then it provides a story, an editor maybe reviews, publishes. that story should be done in 5 minutes. I feel like the stories that journalists should be doing now, that journalists should concern themselves about, are stories that require your field work, that bring soul into journalism. Stories that it could even still be inflation. It is not inflation from GDP, from MBS numbers. It's inflation from you're going to the field, you're speaking to people, you know what it means to them, you know what it translates to, how it means for lives. How many people have been kicked out of the life they can afford because of inflation? That's how you report that inflation report as a journalist. But if you are going to be reporting like numbers from a report, personally, I do not think that is something that we should waste billable journalism hours on. So one way I feel like we can take advantage of the AI is, one, to use it. Now, use it. There are certain stories you cannot use AI for. For example, some of the stories that Dr. Ladi was talking about earlier, about going to the field, reporting insurgency, doing cross-border journalism. There's no AI. The most sophisticated AI systems in the world cannot do that. But that's where you shine as a journalist. That's the one I would say journalists should focus their attention on. Then these other little stories here and there, news, run-of-the-mill, press statements, this, that. I personally I believe that AI should do that. We should outsource those to AI. But where the problem is also that there needs to be disclosure. But of course, let me not get into the ethical conversation. So we need to use AI. We need to maybe not fight it. We need to also leverage it, build systems that serve our purpose. And that's way we can benefit from the acceleration and efficiency gains that AI provides.
Thank you very much, Maiwa, for that. And indeed, I agree with you that there are several stories that we shouldn't see, for want of a better word, spend our time doing, like press releases. And that's one way, like you said, to use AI to save time and do more lucrative and more impactful reporting with our time. I'll come back to you on a question about SEO and how to use AI, because you spoke about censorship, for want of a better word, and how algorithmic bias has affected us so much. So I want you to think about a perfect answer for SEO and how we can use AI to save ourselves that challenge we're facing. Back to you, Mr. Ololade, is to talk about the challenges as a newsroom manager, the challenges you're seeing that we face with AI in terms of reporting, I mean, the general tenets of journalism and how AI is affecting, especially the new crop of journalists we're seeing today who are coming up with AI.
Come again, please.
So I'd like you to speak to the challenges you see as a newsroom manager with the talent or the journalists, reporters you manage in the newsroom, how AI is affecting the quality of work.
Yeah, I would say that one of the greatest challenges is that AI has created a culture of indolence, or I would say it has made even beat reporters become lazier. Their dependence on AI. Maiwa said something. I picked two things from what he said earlier. He sort of substantiated what I said about going to the field to get the real work done. Then he also talked about not paying much mind to certain kind of stories, like having to craft out a press release from MBS statistics, for instance. Fine. All those kind of tasks and minor data analysis and so on, the AI could be used to punish that. But the commitment of journalists in the newsroom now has established that AI is no longer a neutral actor in the newsroom. It is used to drive the core of news reportage. Beat reporters make use of AI, And given that AI systems remix and have the capacity to recontextualize content, this threatens factual preservation. And it further established that there is the need to establish AI resistant, or I wouldn't call it AI resistant. On one hand, I believe we should have an AI resistant, each newsroom should have AI resistant journalistic archives to guard against the preservation of facts and data. Then there is the need to invest more in the training of the younger generation of journalists, get them interested, passionate about actual field reporting. We need to also establish as a house style, we need to draw the line between transparency and in our reportage. We need to demand greater devotion to the ethics of the practice. And more newsrooms should, and journalists could come up with a means to train their journalists better, form coalitions. Yes, we could form inter-newsroom coalitions between news managers, newsroom civic tech actors, and in order to defend these freedoms and that we are talking about right now. We need to create and fund the Afro-contextual AI tools rooted in the preservation of editorial integrity. Because from my experience, I have seen news produced by beat reporters that has one version in print, and you have a different version online. You know, let me be more explicit. There are certain things that wouldn't be allowed in print while publishing news about a particular industry, maybe let's say for aviation or banking and so on. Then a particular reporter would find a way to circumvent this. He would give you that version that is ethically appropriate for publication in print. Then they would now go around to liaise with the online department to produce or publish that would resonate like a form of advertorial for vested interests. And this affects and reduces editorial integrity in very immense ways. So in this respect, I would also say that the main newsroom and the online department should never function, should never operate as silos. There has to be uniformity in practice and ethical application to the whole concept of what the acceptable house style is.
Thank you, Mr. Ololade. Still on you. This is a very direct question. Is AI taking over the gatekeeping role of editors or newsroom managers?
Well, to a considerable extent. I wouldn't say AI has completely taken over, but AI has made remarkable foray into the area of gatekeeping. You know, when you feed data, you feed industry data into an AI platform, and it turns out the story. And to the editor, I know AI is quite adept at churning out news reports in the inverted pyramid style with respect to all the rules and so on. There's the tendency for the editorial manager to become laid back and be like, oh, this looks good, this reads nice, it resonates according to the house style and so on. So doing, there's the tendency to overlook a lot of things, and you become blinded by the seeming accuracy of that particular report. So, and I also agree that in certain ways, when we talk about algorithmic influence of AI, its algorithmic dominance, the way it determines what the kind of news that trends and everything, that's some form of gatekeeping on its own, and it affects news managers too. That is why you find out that the the kind of human interest journalism, investigative features that we talk about are relegated to the backseat, why there is a sort of a inordinate fixation on celebrity gossip, on the superficial aspects of news coverage. And what the news manager would always tell you is that this is what is trending. At times, we find out that the actual newsroom is influenced by what is trending online, and they will try to work in virtual lockstep with that in order not to be left behind, like they say. So to a very considerable extent, AI has made remarkable forward. It's actually competing with news managers. To a considerable extent, it's determining what is newsworthy and what isn't newsworthy.
Thank you very much. So let's move over to the ethics question and the conversation, and I'll start with you, Mayowa. What are the red lines we seem to be crossing or should not be crossing with the use of AI in journalism today?
Okay, so this is a very broad conversation when it comes to ethics. And there's what they say around, there are some people who believe in certain fixed ethical systems. There are some people who believe in circumstantial ethics, case by case review of what the ethical situation is. But I feel like generally, one thing that we all can agree on, or I hope that we all can agree on, is disclosure. So I've had these conversations with journalists. I recently concluded a research about use of AI in newsrooms, and one of the things I found is that when I spoke to journalists and say, "Oh, what do you think about disclosure?" Say, we should all disclose. If you use AI, you should say it. You should do this, you do that. Now, when we now got to the part of the conversation where it came to the nitty-gritty of disclosure itself. So if you wrote a story, you finished writing the story, then you give it to her and say, check for typos, put the appropriate punctuations, and tell me ways in which the story can be improved. And AI does that. You make a few changes to the story, you publish it. Is there a need for disclosure in that system? Would you say, I have used AI to edit or to work on punctuations, for example? That's one side. Number two, if you have an idea, you've gotten your data, you give it to AI to write the story. Now, AI does 80 to 90% of the writing, but all the data is yours. All the quote unquote investigation is yours. How do you share credit with AI systems and yourself? Now, one of the answers I got was that if I did 80% of the writing, AI did 20%, I'm not going to credit AI. Then we flip it. If AI did 80% and you did 20%, should AI credit you? Should you get credit for that same story? And so these questions are the questions where we then have to basically have the hard conversations within our newsrooms to say, I've been reading Nigerian newsroom for a bit now, and I could count on one finger the amount of stories I've seen with credits to AI. But I believe, especially from my research, that a lot more Nigerian journalists use AI than they disclose. And so disclosure, I feel like, is the first problem. The second is, and what Dr. Olade was saying about news managers. The reality is that even as an editor, a journalist can submit a story to you to edit for publication. And you do not know that 80% of that story, the journalist used AI to do it. You edit it innocently, you make the necessary changes, and you publish. Where some of us maybe suspect is that, you know that Tunde does not write as good as this. Or maybe Dami's writing is better than this. Has more so than what this is presenting. But you know, because of the pressure of how many stories an editor gets to edit in a day, especially a news editor, for example, you also don't want to be AI gatekeeper. in that sense. So at that rate, we need to have a conversation where newsrooms are not afraid to say this story was assisted by AI, was written by AI. One of the things that I feel like a lot of newsrooms are now doing and are finding comfortable to do is to say this image was AI generated. And that's also because the audience knows that the image was AI generated. So you disclose that, yes, it was AI generated. Now, the
Thank you.
text that was, so let me
Sorry,
just,
Mayo, I have to cut him now. We're running late on time and we have to provide opportunity for others to intervene. I'd just like to quickly say that you can share insights from this conversation on your social media platform. Please use the chat box and the question and answer box to make comments, join the conversation, share your thoughts, especially on AI and giving credit. And I hear you clearly, very clearly, Mayowa, when you ask, should AI credit me? And for someone who uses AI a lot, especially during my ideation process, I agree with you that disclosure is important and it shouldn't be too hard, idealistically, but realistically, it's very hard to give credit, but I think we should. And a lot of editors today are guilty of using AI I'm not saying, don't quote me anywhere, but a lot of editors use Grammarly. So, and that's AI too, right? So we're guilty of doing AI ourselves. I'll come over to you, Mr. Ololade, on this red lines Mayo has mentioned. And for want of time, I want us to stick to disclosure, especially, which is one of the major challenge we have for people who do not like to share bylines. Imagine sharing byline with AI. What do you think from top newsroom management to reporters on disclosure? How do we make this a culture? Because if we are saying we hold power to account or government accountable, we should be able to start with ourselves as well to say 80% of the story was done by the reporter and 20% by this. How do we do that? How do we get that to become a culture, disclosure, transparency, accountability, which we preach every day?
Like I said, it's a very tricky trope because most editors, journalists, would not want to admit, because in the way it erodes their they find it how would I put it, there's a way it could demean the work, especially one that involves the depth of research and everything. In a case whereby the journalist writes 80% of the story and AI handles like 20% of it, if that 20% has to do with data analysis and everything, I believe there should be, because oftentimes I find it could be the case that when faced with a large swath of data and that particular story is time-bound, there's a tendency for the journalists to make use of AI. It doesn't even have to be ChatGPT and so on. There are other apps that aren't so popular and that precede the likes of ChatGPT, DeepSeek or whatsoever, and so on. The newsroom could evolve a culture whereby they credit AI with that analysis. In the case of an image generated by AI, of course, that is discernible to everyone. It's self-evident that this particular image was generated by AI. But when it comes to data, journalism, it's a profession that has to do with a lot of ego tripping. Nobody wants to share byline with a machine. And in the case whereby the machine does the bulk of the work, the journalist will find it demeaning to him and to his practice to admit that a certain aspects of the work were handled by AI. Each newsroom could evolve a culture whereby when you do that, you give credit to AI. When more than one person does a story, you find at the foot of the story, most times, additional reports by, because nobody wants the efforts of those who contributed to the story to go to waste or to be silenced. So in the same vein, newsrooms could devise a particular culture whereby you give due attribution to AI. It's in the long run, it will ennoble your practice. It will enable your practice in the long run, because stories that are written by AI, there are always some awkward sentence structures, robotic phrasing, that gives away such stories to discerning readers.
Yes.
So one word.
I agree with you totally. So I'm looking forward to an era where we can say additional reporting by ChatGPT, additional reporting by something, Gemini or Microsoft Pilot or any of those things. And I just wanted to speak very quickly to how, transparency, this disclosure could also boost the trust in media. When people start to see that media houses are forthcoming with the tools they use in their reporting. I mean, it will be very lovely to see that a newspaper is telling me, oh, some of this reporting was done by ChatGPT. I'm like, oh, wow, so people can be this transparent. I think it improves trust from readers and it strengthens relationship between media houses and their readers. I'd like to move us forward on this conversation. We've talked about a lot of problems that AI poses, and I'd like us to move to solutions. And I come back to you, Mayowa. I spoke about I asked you to think about how we can leverage AI to maneuver the issue of algorithm bias and blocking of stories from our region. Is this something SEO can do, or can you speak to ways we can do this using AI as well?
Thank you. So the reality is that yes, SEO helps a lot. So the way to also look at SEO is that, and maybe a lot of newsrooms are already considering this, is that some of SEO is AI generated, because the other side of SEO, which is the Google side, the beta side or whatever, are done by AI. So they know what to prioritize and what not to. So if you also use AI in your SEO structuring, it knows what the other AI on the other side needs or demands. So it can adjust your SEO to sort of fit into that category. And that way, the story moves further and faster. Then the second thing about SEO is also that we need to sort of build capacity for journalists, for the tech side of our teams, to also understand what the actual requirements of every story is. And as a result, that way, our stories rank higher, our stories go further. And we also need to understand the difference in terms of context. One of the things that we are seeing within the global network is that there's now a shift to video content, TikToks, Instagram videos, even Twitter is trying to do like more video content in that sense. Understanding where the primacy is part time also sort of helps us decide how to adjust our SEO and how to push that. So, for example, when you were asking that question earlier, I was looking at Google Trends for the past 7 days in Nigeria. And one of the things I find is that the biggest search over every weekend in Nigerian media, in Nigerian Google searches, are sports stories. People are asking specific sports questions. And of course, I've come to find out also by my own experience and research that most people do this to bet. They use it for betting. And so if the media finds a way to intervene in that process and provide the answers that, quote unquote, many of these people are asking, the algorithm begins to favor stories from those certain media houses, because it thinks that you provide the answers to the highest number of questions being asked over a weekend. So that's how I think about it.
Thank you very much. There's a question for you, Mayowa, in the question and answer box. If you could respond to that quickly. Back to you, Ms. Ololade. What are the business opportunities available with AI for newsrooms, especially in an age of dwindling finances, funding? Advertising revenue is almost history now, as we can see, and newsrooms are struggling to survive. What are the business opportunities available with AI for newsrooms?
Yeah, well, I would say they are limitless, depending on the ingenuity of that particular newsroom or its managers or its editorial managers. AI could be used to produce advertorials, for instance, of an audiovisual nature. In a tradition, most traditional press gradually sought synergy to synthesize multimedia platforms. And you could tap into that. AI could be very useful into producing such content. It could be used to produce audiovisuals, short, it could veer into production of short social documentaries, videographies that addresses issues crucial to its philosophical bent, and even what the news audience wants. I think it was Telegraph as far back as about a decade ago, the Telegraph of London. And so when QR code was the thing, was the in thing, they did a lot of projects, built a lot of editorial projects around that. Then with the advent of multimedia journalism, 360, and immersive journalism too, you find the likes of the Guardian of London investing heavily. That was what produced projects like when the Firestorm project, it was a reportage of a fire disaster back then. And such content, when you produce such audiovisual content, there is no way that you would produce a work of note that wouldn't attract patronage from within and outside too. Then AI too. I'm also looking forward to a future whereby newsrooms could on their own furnish and produce AI apps that addresses crucial needs within the media circuits and associated industries too. It's possible. There are a whole lot of industries associated with editorial work, with publishing, that AI could address. That AI could prove useful. It could be in the area of content production, packaging, and so on. So there is no limit to what, and it could also be used to educate journalists to show up skills as you know, newsrooms could evolve AI literacy modules whereby they train undergraduates and reporters on the job and so on. It could be done as a individual effort of a particular newsroom or in coalition with a few other newsrooms too. Then AI too could be, it could be also utilized in creating a sort of a database that is insulated from the algorithmic dominance of these global platforms that we are talking about, because we can't demand, it's not enough to demand transparency from them. We lack the might and the kind of infrastructure to counter their own well-established digital infrastructure. But I'm looking forward to a situation whereby in Nigeria here, in Africa here, newsrooms maybe in coalition, could form a coalition whereby they come up with that sort of digital infrastructure or framework that would insulate our media climb here from the extreme dominance of what we have out there. It could be a way to renegotiate, you know, a balance in the way we engage with them, or with the way they determine which of our content gets noticed and which doesn't get noticed.
I'd have to come in there, Mr. Ololade. We're 30 minutes to the end of this call, and I hear you clearly when you say collaboration is very important, and we need to prioritize that across board. Tech experts, civil society, journalists, we need to all get off our high horses and start to work together even more to make sure that we get on board this conversation. And like someone in the comments said, AI is here to stay. We can't do away with it. We can't wish it away. What we need to do is get on top of the issue and get working. We have 4 minutes for 2 questions or 2 comments from participants on the call, and we'll come back to the panelists for their closing thoughts. So if you have a comment or question randomly, 2 persons, 2 minutes each, and we'll take your comments and question. And if there's no questions or comments, we can move over to the panelists too. I mean, the conversation is quite robust and it doesn't end here. It continues within our circles, our networks, our newsrooms, on social media platforms. It's an important conversation we need to have, especially on how to sanitize the press space or the journalism space, if you like. Any questions, any comments? There's a question for you in the Q&A box, Mr. Ololade, if you could respond to that.
Oh, please hold on.
You could respond to it in the comment section. I'll take, I see, oh, I thought I saw a hand now. Just respond to the question in the Q&A box directly, Mr. Olade. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so in the absence of any comments or any question, I'll circle back to you, Maiwa, for your closing thoughts on this conversation.
Thank you. I'd say that I like that we're having this conversation, and I think that is more of questions than answers. We definitely then have to go back to our newsrooms to ask those hard questions. Of course, I've seen messages from some of my own colleagues saying that, so I would then see additional reporting by ChatGPT, additional reporting by Gemini, and all that. And the reality is that we need to face what this our reality is going to become. Could imagine, maybe I was not that active, but I could imagine when the world was moving away from typewriters to computers, there must have been people who also sort of had that form of, now say I use computer to do this work, and I don't know, it feels odd now, but those were conversations that existed many years ago. So my own contribution to this entire conversation, like I said earlier, I've been doing a lot of research on AI and newsrooms, especially Nigerian newsrooms and journalists. And I have my next study basically is on how the audience are going to receive what it means for a newsroom to say, we generated this with AI, we did the story with ChatGPT, or what the response is going to be. Is it going to be, Chiamaka mentioned earlier that it would be trust and transparency. There are journalists who fear that the interpretation will not be trust and transparency, to be laziness on the part of journalists. So there's fear, there's apprehension. And so how I'm trying to contribute to that conversation is to actually go to the audience and say, okay, if this newspaper does it like this, what's going to be your reaction? Are you going to trust them for it? Are you going to distrust them? Is this going to help you engage with them more? Or are you going to say, I'm no longer reading that newspaper, they write all their stories with AI, And so once we have those answers, then we are able to make informed decisions. So my final comments for everyone, for newsroom leaders, is let's invest, quote unquote, in the research to understand what this means for the audiences, how we are developing the guidelines, what we are going to use, what disclosure methods we are using. Then for the audience, let's give actual feedback as to if a newsroom is doing this, what's our reaction to that? Say your truths. Help us understand how we should deal with that. And for journalists, I would say that the people who fought the typewriters of yesterday, or the people who fought the printing press of 500 years ago.
Thank you very much,
They didn't win
Maiwa.
those battles. Thank you.
Mr. Olade, please take 3 minutes, and as part of your 3 minutes, there's a question here asking if photojournalists, sorry, I missed that. If photojournalists should, editing, right? If journalists could also use editing for AI to edit photos. Let me read that very carefully. Editors should be encouraged to also look out for photo properties. We have had cases that photos were used to AI-generated photos during the End Bad Governance protests. I'm sure if reputable media houses place emphasis on photo properties, it will discourage use of AI. This is not the question I'm looking for. Apologies. But while I'm looking for the question, please go ahead and give your closing thoughts, Mr. Olade. I'll find the question now.
Okay. I already responded to the question on if AI can be used to edit. Then I responded in the text box. Then on a final note, I would say that journalism thrives on the human element. So the first thing we have to get right is the human element involved in journalism practice. What is the nature of the human element? Because without them, journalism, they are the ones who give substance, give life to journalism. So we must get it right with the human elements, that is in terms of the editorial force. So staff training and retraining has to be prioritized by media organizations, especially about how to engage with AI and how to put it to use and not be consumed by its allure. Then, like I said earlier, we need more indigenous, we need indigenous real-time AI forensics built to identify what is factually true or not. It's part of the bulk of what the fact checking aspects of journalism does. Then the newsroom and online department must stop operating as silos because there must be uniformity of practice and ethics. Journalism organizations could partner with journalism training schools to institute modules on AI. So, you know, when you start from the foundation, you start training aspiring journalists to become conversant with what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable in the use of AI and how they engage with AI and with the practice. It makes things easier when they get into the industry. It's not like they are coming as tabula rasa. So I would say that the first thing we have to get it right with is the human element. The issue of ethics, it may seem hackneyed, like a cliche, but the issue of ethics and professionalism would form a very, very strong shield about whatever they allow of against the manipulative tendencies of using AI and so on. So.
Thank you very much to our wonderful panelists. And what has ranked across the submissions of our panelists is ethics, professionalism, acceptance, accountability, transparency. Research is one last thing Maiwa mentioned, and I agree entirely. There's no way to get on board this conversation if we don't know what people are looking for and how to offer what they're looking for away from the Western conversation. Indeed, indigenous AIs, and I see in the comment section, someone said AI is deceitful or is misleading or could lead to calamity, and research is one way to avoid such calamity happening. Maiwa, to respond to the question of laziness is against trust, I'd like to maybe not a very funny joke, but to say, why do we bother to use cell phones when we can still write letters and send them across the sea to get to people in the US? Why use a cell phone instead? And I agree with all of the conversations we're having. I like the point that Ololade made about, you know, educating journalism students or mass communication students, if you like. But I also like to add that what we are saying today, people who are coming into the industry are not regular mass comm graduates or journalism students, people from the sciences, from whatever background are coming into the industry today to practice, and which is why organizations like Woolley Foundation is prioritizing media and information literacy and introducing students to AI for fact-checking, for example, which is like very basic for people to do. Just introducing people to these technologies is one way I think we can get on board this conversation. If you don't know it, you wouldn't fathom what calamity or greatness can come out of it. Thank you to the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism for putting this conversation together. Please do well to join the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism Conversations, the Journalism Society Conversation. Another one is coming up on Tuesday, the 13th of May. Please do well to join this conversation. Thank you to everyone who has stayed on the call. We had at some point about 86 people on this call, and we're ending the call with 81 persons on this call. This shows how important this conversation is for our well-being as a society. And I'll go back to my opening comment about the press being the lifeblood of every democracy, and we must, as a matter of urgency, support the press in Nigeria and across the world as well. Thank you very much to our expert. I see Professor Ogwezi Ndisika on this call. Thank you very much for joining. To our panelists, again, thank you very much for your wealth of knowledge which you've shared with us. What we've succeeded in doing is to finger our brains, to stimulate us to continue having these conversations. There are a lot of questions about what AI can and cannot do, and it's within our powers to discover what we can do. Kudos to the likes of Maiwa taking the pain to do research, and we need to really invest in research. From all of us at WSCIJ, thank you for being part of this conversation and enjoy a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so
Yeah.
much, Fran. Had a great time. Thank you.